everyone. Welcome back to the Fine Tuned Show. Today, I have with me Atul Sharma, co founder and head of AI at Karatech. And we are going to talk about how AI is impacting enterprise teams. Welcome, Atul, to the show.
Hey, thanks, Gautam. Thanks for having me here.
You're most welcome. And can you start with saying a few lines of introduction about yourself?
Yeah, sure. For me, it's been about 20 years in the industry, largely focused on software engineering, played various roles from application programmer to an engineering manager. I've seen the advent of cloud, how the large enterprises have gone through the initial digital transformation, then taking up the cloud adoption, and then subsequently now I'm in the front seat when it comes to the AI transformation. So yeah, really looking forward to it. I'm in the thick of things now here at Kara.ai, and yeah, loving it.
Awesome. We are going to talk about all of this today. So let's first get started and kind of, like connects with what you just said. At Microsoft and AWS, you have been in the middle of the cloud transformation era, and now you are at the forefront of AI transformation. So what similarities and differences do you see between these two transformation phases?
In many ways, I see the adoption is quite similar. But in my perspective, from where I see it, from my vantage point, I see that the resistance is quite different. So, when it comes to the resistance, the way I see this is that the resistance when it came to cloud transformation was very much rational. The CXOs were asking questions specifically around, okay, what am I going to do with all the investments that I have made on the on-prem infrastructure? That has become a depreciating asset for me now. How am I going to deal with that? What sort of control that I'm going to have when I go to the cloud in terms of having the ability to run my workload there? They've had concerns around the compliance requirements. How am I going to deal with those? So those were all very relevant questions. And in my mind, I think for all those questions, the hyperscalers were pretty prepared in terms of answering those questions. They were able to truly create a picture of what good looks like, what does the TCO looks like, and how they're going to help the customer take that one step at a time and move to the cloud. I think I've seen at AWS during my tenure with AWS for 5 years, I've seen where AWS has actually gone beyond the standard approach of helping customers adopt cloud. They actually go about helping them in really finding out buyers for their on-prem infrastructure as well. So the approach was very evolving in that sense. Whereas when it comes to AI, the resistance I feel is quite personal. I feel that there is this concern around the identity itself, about the people who are part of this whole transformation. A lot of the cognitive work that the engineers used to do earlier has kind of now become undifferentiated. And from the lens that I see, that every organization, when you're building a platform, a cloud native platform, for example, or an AI native use case that you're trying to solve, there are going to be things which are differentiated and there are going to be things which are undifferentiated. So all the cognitive work that the engineers used to do earlier, which was undifferentiated, is largely can be done by AI. And that's where I feel that the enterprises are not yet figured out a way on how they're going to address that gap. How are they going to basically reskill their teams and enable them to a point where they're able to focus more on those differentiated capabilities that they can bring to the table? I think that's one of the key differences that I see between two. The other thing that I see is the overall migration map, Gautam. So if you go back to the cloud days, right? If you have a large enterprise running large amount of workload on-prem, there was a step-by-step process in terms of how they go about going to the cloud, right? So the very first step they would usually take is doing a lift and shift. And then they would look at maybe modernizing some of the workload and figuring out what are the cloud native platforms or the cloud native patterns that they could probably adopt over a period of time to further bring the optimization from cost perspective. So it was very step-by-step process, which they could, embrace as they incrementally become stronger and stronger in cloud. But when it comes to the AI, there is no such migration map available for the teams. Now, the biggest challenge that I feel the enterprises are facing is that now they have this whole intelligence layer which can be built using AI, but this is not something they can easily wrap their existing products or the legacy products on top, right? They are in that conundrum right now, thinking whether I should be reimagining some of these business use cases to kind of really take the advantage of AI. But one thing is for sure, which I believe is common across both of these threads, is the compounding aspect of it, right? People who are the early movers versus people who are the laggards.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel that the people who have moved in the past as well, when we were going through the cloud transformation, the people who invested early in that were able to build that sort of muscle using the cloud capabilities, where they were able to create a value proposition and a mode for themselves over a period of time, and they were really good at running their workload in cloud. Whereas the laggards were struggling, even they are struggling till date today. And the same goes with the AI as well. People who are the early movers are going to have that advantage of making the most of it, falling, and then again learning from their mistakes and then improving upon that. So I feel that from that perspective, this is the time for any enterprise customer to actually start investing in AI. And I think that's the problem that we are trying to help our customers solve at Kara.
Awesome. And to just to understand that better and draw some parallels there. So this slow velocity or skepticism that you mentioned, I think in the cloud transformation era we were talking about replacing infrastructure
Yeah,
primarily,
true.
and in the AI transformation we are talking about replacing people and processes. So it's a major shift. It's a no starter and a blocker for a lot of people, like from a like that psychological perspective, that they have been coming through all of these processes and kind of growing in these teams, and suddenly you have something that replaces the way they think, the way they design their work, the way they take care of their day to day. So it's kind of on one side understandable that there are a lot of teams who are going to have a slow velocity because of these primarily the redesign part of the whole work. And replacing infrastructure versus replacing people is very different altogether. Now, to walk into the next one, basically, when you talk to enterprises that want to integrate AI in their business processes, what is the current state looking like for you? Like, is there a average picture there, or do you see a lot of differences across different teams?
This is very interesting, Gautam, and I think I had the privilege of working at AWS when the large enterprise customers were actually going through this initial move towards cloud, towards AI. From my experience, if I were to share, when I used to walk into some of these meetings with these large customers, helping them solve their most complex problems and really helping them drive their customer business outcomes, one of the things that I used to notice almost everywhere is this, what I call pilot graveyard, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way I explain this is that you walk into any CXO meeting, you will know that the companies are investing heavily in AI in many ways. They have a mandate from the board. They understand that they need to spend in figuring out how the organization can be AI ready or AI first. And the way they start is with, they would basically go about building a team of say 30 or 40 developers, hiring an AI lead, and then figuring out maybe 2 or 3 POCs which they will run in the organization, or pilots within the organization. They will dabble a little bit with the RAG based pipelines. They will probably have some people go through training and enablement for this. But in saying all of this, the organizations were only investing in acquiring these tools. The primary root cause that I see in terms of this current state that they are in is because everyone was thinking from a leadership perspective. I feel that everyone was thinking from a tech first approach or a tool first approach rather than really thinking from a perspective of outcome first approach, right? So in my mind, everything is tooling first and outcome last, right? So the state that I used to see everywhere is that they have a bunch of POCs. They've done some hackathons across the organization where people have kind of learned some aspects of AI and they kind of are familiar with it, but there is no real pathway to production that's clearly defined. And like I said, the first reason is we are focusing a lot more on the technology rather than really figuring out what is it that my organization is lacking and how AI can come and help me improve that. I think the second reason that is in top of my mind is from a confidence gap. I think the leadership has not been able to earn the trust of the senior engineers within the organization in order to really define what the path to production looks like. Because from my experience in software engineering, I feel that the senior engineers are the ones who are the backbone of, or you can think of them as the makers checkers for anything that goes to production. right? And these are the same people who have seen the curve of microservices, right? At some point in time in the past, people used to say microservices will solve all the problems of the world. That didn't happen the way that we said, and there were certain cases where microservices were very helpful, while the other cases, even the monolithic architecture works pretty well, right? So those were the decisions that some of these senior engineers made, depending on the context of the business problem that they were trying to solve. I feel that somewhere the senior engineers today in the industry feel a bit left out, in the sense that the organizations, in the interest of speed of adopting AI and becoming an AI first organization, they haven't been able to bring them on board with the idea of how AI can actually help them some of the problems that they typically face during the software development lifecycle. I think that's another reason.
Mhm.
The third reason that I feel is, and which I feel is very fixable, that is no baseline. So if you have a problem today, do you have a baseline of that? If you think that the problem today is that your velocity is not as fast as you would expect in a typical scrum, then what is the baseline for that today? And can you measure it over a course of, say, 6 months to 1 year across all the development teams or across all the product engineering teams that are working in your organization? That's one example. Second is, if you are building an architecture, and then if you feel that after 6 months you have to rework on that architecture because of some decisions that you would have made, can AI come and help you improve those decisions? And what are the measurements that define your current baseline? So unless you invest in figuring out what are your problems and how do you measure your problems, you have no way to define that when you brought in AI, these are the improvements you were able to see by bringing in AI. In Amazon, we use this terminology called working backwards, which largely talks about first figuring out what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and work backwards from that problem statement to figure out what does that solution look like and why is that the best solution. And I think
Mhm.
this particular way of, or a mechanism, works really well if you were to apply that from a perspective of adopting AI within the organization.
Nice. And it's it's like very interesting that you say that, and I see a connection between the two parts that you mentioned. It's kind of like, if you are involving the seniors, the senior engineers, or people who are there, experienced, have looked at stuff for quite some time, you will be able to find problems easier. And if you skip them, it's more like, trying to get into an AI story, trying to, like slap a solution on top of something that you may not be clear about. So it kind of, like feeds each other. Like if you involve the right people, you will find the right problems to solve. And if you don't, then, like it just becomes a checkbox on a slide deck, right?
Absolutely. I think that's what really happens. And I think they are the backbones of any organization in terms of really taking things till the end, taking things
Mhm.
into the production in front of your customers, really delivering the value to your customers, right? And it is important for organizations to take them on board as you go through this AI transformation journey.
Awesome. Let's move on to the next one. So, Kara is building this idea around enterprise memory. Would you like to talk a little more about that? Like, what exactly is the USP of the solution?
Absolutely. And this is probably closest to my heart, purely because of what I had experience while working at both AWS and Microsoft. And largely throughout this decade of my experience at AWS and Microsoft, it was largely about solving the problems for our customers, building the solutions, building cloud native solutions for them, and figuring out why that is the best solution for them to solve that particular problem. And during my experience, we would walk into a customer, we understand the problem statement, we start building the solution for them, and then we make sure that they have a measurable way to see the success of that product, right? And that could be a 6 months, 1 year engagement that we work typically with the customer. And in that period of that 1 year, we would make a lot of decisions. We would learn, and we would unlearn a lot of things. There's just going to be a lot of tribal knowledge that we will accumulate over a period of time, and we know exactly what works best in that organization if you were to take one thing from one step to the other. Because I think you would probably agree with me that every organization has a very peculiar flavor of software development lifecycle. There are ways in which they are different, there are ways in which they are similar, but then it's only when you actually take a product from envisioning and discovery all the way to the production, that's when you realize what that process looks like. And a lot of this information, a lot of this learning really stays in the minds of people, and it's just tribal knowledge, which unfortunately disappears as soon as you finish that engagement. Especially if you are a consultant, if you are a vendor working for that customer solving a business problem. And that's the question that we took to ourselves. And that's the challenge at Kara that we took to ourselves. And we said, why can't we do something about this? What if we do the second engagement with the same customer, starting from where we left the first engagement? How can I bring in all that tribal knowledge that I understand about their integration patterns, that I understand about their compliance requirements, that I understand about different business personas that are there within their organization, to figure out a way in terms of how to improve the speed of the navigation as I kind of go through the software development process, right? So with that, we thought every organization, especially enterprise customers, what we call as they end up paying learning tax, which is the tax that you pay every time when you do an engagement with a vendor, with the same vendor or a different vendor. The tax that you pay when you roll a team, which means that you are rotating a set of folks who are there in the team, and the new one comes and they go through that entire forming and norming process, right? Or when you're starting a new statement of work all together with a new customer, with a new vendor, right? So in each of those scenarios, you end up paying learning tax. And in order to circumvent and remove this learning tax, we came up with this framework or a capability within our product of Kara Code, which is called enterprise memory, which kind of continuously learns from the decisions that you make and surfaces those decisions in form of intelligence in front of various personas who are participating in a software development lifecycle. We also call this way of doing software development as compounding builds. Now, sorry about that.
No worries.
That's what we call as compounding build. Now, from our early experimentation, what we see is that the compounding builds have been able to provide us up to 40% improvement in terms of the go-to-market on the first engagement. And on the subsequent engagements, we're able to see up to 50%. And we're expecting that to go 60% plus as we do more and more engagements with our customers.
Awesome. That sounds like a real problem solved right there. Like this learning tax, as you say, is a pretty interesting, a use case to tackle, because every project has this problem. Like every single software project has this problem, whether it is just the vendors or even, like new people coming into a team from a different project, or even new people being hired into the company. Everybody goes through that, like that pain point. And if there is a, like a repository of decisions already there for you to help you figure out what to do next and how to go around things, I think that makes a lot of sense. So super cool stuff there. Now, there is a lot of debate around AI coding tools right now. From what you are seeing with enterprise engineering side of things, what's actually working on the ground and what's overhyped? Because on one side there is this hype cycle, and we have seen that. And on the other side, there are, like people very skeptical about things, that AI does not work, the code produced is not that great, and so on. So what's your opinion? Where are we on the ground?
This is a really interesting one, Gautam, and I think the way we approach this at Kara is we kind of break this down into three things, right? And that's something that we want to embed as part of the tooling that we have for our engineers. There are three different levels is what we see when it comes to the AI coding tools, right? And how you're basically adopting those into your day-to-day software development. And we classify them as AI assisted development, AI driven development, and AI managed development. So, and under each of these categories, there are certain activities or certain things that you do in a typical software development lifecycle. We categorize them into these three classifications. So for instance, we call something AI assisted when the level of complexity is high, where there is a human in loop is involved. And plus, it is more to do with, for example, if you have a compliance requirement, which needs to be fully understood before you can actually implement this, which also maybe require a regional flavor, which may or may not be available with an individual LLM model that these AI agents are using, right? So for those kind of requirements, and maybe you are building some custom algorithm, which is a fine-tuned algorithm of something which is available publicly. In those cases, we treat this as AI assisted, where large part of the heavy lifting is still done by human, and where there is a fractional work that can still be done with AI, which is largely around the undifferentiated work. For example, doing unit testing, code completion, test generation, so on. right? So for all of those activities, we will use AI assisted approach, whereas for all the complex algorithm and proprietary confidential business logic, we will use, which is going to be done using the human in loop. The second category for us is the AI driven development, where large part of the heavy lifting is done by AI. However, there is still a human in loop which takes a decision in terms of what looks good, right? And they go through the entire thing. It is still important that the human is building that level of intimacy with the code when you're doing AI driven development, which essentially means that you still understand the code to the T, that if there is a bug, and developers have this tendency, Gautam, that you probably understand it better, which is that the moment they see an error log or a debug log in the deployed code, they can easily tell you exactly where this problem is occurring, right? So we expect that level of intimacy when you're doing AI driven development, right? The next level is what we call as the AI management development, which is where we look at AI doing large part of the heavy lifting, including differentiated capabilities and differentiated code as well, where human involvement is only limited from a perspective of doing a peer review. Even from our organization perspective, none of our code that we write leaves the developer box until they have a human in loop really looking at the code. And then obviously in the pull, once the pull request is raised, we will have another engineer plus an AI agent really reviewing the code to kind of see if all the compliance is in place. But from our perspective, we see that there is about 20 to 30% gain is what I see when it comes to AI driven development. Whereas when it comes to AI managed, we expect that gain to go up to 50% or even more. But AI assisted is where we see the minimal amount of gain, which is about 10%.
Okay, so just to like connect it with the part where we want to like see how much hype is there. So essentially, and this kind of the bucketing that you just did, it makes total sense because in some places you might just get 10% like productivity gains, which is also a study that I was reading about, that the average productivity gain is around 10% on all of AI. And then on the other side, where you have AI managed versus, let's say, AI driven development, you get better gains. But it kind of depends on what are you building. If you
Exactly.
are looking at 10-year-old code base with millions of lines of code, you might be happy with AI assisted side of things. And if you are building something completely new from scratch today,
So, yeah.
you might start with AI managed, because that is where like the basic best practices and majority of boilerplate and everything can be done pretty easily using AI.
Absolutely. And to your point, it's spot on, right? If you're building something from scratch, it's a pure greenfield reimagined product that you're building, or a totally net new problem that you're trying to solve. As long as you have the necessary organizational guardrails and architectural guidelines or blueprints in place that are codified and are made available to your AI agents or agentic IDEs, then AI managed is the way to go forward. Provided you have all of that guidelines and skills, different agents call it differently, but the idea is as long as you have those guardrails in place, then AI managed is the way forward. And I think for greenfield ones, that's the best way to move forward. And like you said, specifically if you are doing something which is brownfield, or you're working on a monolith application which has existed for many years, you want to be a little cautious in terms of going for a full-fledged AI managed approach.
Yeah. And with models improving on pretty much like monthly basis, I don't think it's too far away from here that we will see a lot more AI managed approach in legacy code bases as well. It just requires the models to become more trained, more smart, and hopefully a little bit more hesitant in making big changes. All right. Coming to the final question I have for you is, you have helped CXOs making like big decisions across your pretty much entire career so far. When it comes to AI transformation, what is the biggest mistake that you see people are making these days?
That's an interesting one, because this is something that I have seen happening almost on repeat.
Mhm.
When it comes to these large enterprise customers, right, during my time at AWS as well, you would typically see that a board comes with a budget, that there is this budget that you have for this year that we would like you, all the CXOs and the larger technical leadership, to leverage or to use over the year for transforming the organization, or making the organization go through the AI transformation and become an AI first organization. So the first step that people will do, especially the CXOs and the CTOs and the leadership, they would obviously have those meetings with the different hyperscalers. They will have connects with OpenAI. They'll have connects with AWS for Bedrock. They will have connects with Azure for their AI services. And then they would basically start with doing some pilots with them, right? They will buy a bunch of Copilot licenses. They will buy a bunch of Kiro licenses, and they will start having a team of X number of engineers who would start leveraging these tools, not for doing anything which is directly contributing for production workload, but something that they would run it as parallel to avoid any compliance issues and such. They would start using it for building some of the pilots. They will start hosting some hackathons, and they will start investing in building some prototypes or trying to solve some problems. The issue that I see is that, like I mentioned earlier as well, that most of these initiatives are always led with the tools and not with the business outcome in mind. At the end of 6 months, when you go back to the board meeting, the presentation would talk about, okay, so we have purchased 100,000 Copilot licenses, and we see 75% of adoption of these Copilot licenses. We see people using it day in, day out. We have three pilots being developed on AI, which are progressing towards their path to production. But if you really get down to the bottom of it, nothing has gone to production solving a particular business problem. So you've invested a lot, but you haven't seen any return which is measurable and can be presented to the board, right? I see there is the other side of the coin where the board feels that, yes, there is a very meaningful progress that's happening on the ground. But if I look at it from the lens of measuring the outcome that we've been able to achieve, these are just a bunch of activities that the teams have done, but nothing has translated to an outcome which would show the board the progress towards achieving or becoming an AI first organization. I think that's the biggest problem that I see. People are not starting with a problem and then kind of getting to a solution. The better approach in my mind would be that you pick up maybe 2 or 3 things which, as an organization, you're really good at, right? Don't look at the things which you're not good at. Look at the things which you're good at and which are measurable. Measure those and first see, can AI help you in improving those outcomes, right? If you see a value that AI can bring in, so for example, if you have a software development lifecycle, you are using Scrum as a methodology, can you bring your sprints from a 2-week sprints to a 1-week sprint? Now, 2-week sprints might be working great, but can you bring it down now to a 1-week sprint where you can release to production much faster? Now, this is not something which is not working all right, but can AI create a differentiator there because you're able to measure that? Then apply your AI learnings, work with the hyperscalers or work with the teams that can provide you outside support, and then see how you can optimize this process. And are you able to see some value out of that change that you're bringing in your organization, say over a period of 2 to 3 months? I think that's probably a better way, is what I feel that you can do. Again, I think one of the questions, so there are 2 kind of problems you can solve with AI. One, you can solve your business problems, figure out how you can be better, how you can provide better value to your customers. The second is a more easier, which is an inside looking view, which is like, can I improve my processes by bringing in AI into everything? Can I reimagine my software development lifecycle so that I'm able to have up to 30% faster go to market, right? That's a problem that you would want to solve. Now, when you're going to the business or when you're going to the board, you're not talking about the activities that you did. I think we should be in a position now in every 3 months to say that, okay, this is the outcome we are able to achieve. We are able to say 5%, we are able to achieve 5% faster go to market for the last 3 sprints for 5 different products. That's a good outcome that you're able to achieve. So it's only then you will be able to see the real return of investment, and the board will be convinced that as an organization, we are really moving in the right direction in terms of becoming an AI first organization.
That totally makes sense. I think it's starting with identifying the right problems, and of course going back to your previous point, like involving the right people, because people on the ground, people who have been facing the problems, will have the right to tell you what exactly to solve.
Correct.
And then measuring the impact is how it should be done. But thank you so much for sharing your insights, Atul. This has been super interesting. Anything that you would like to say as a CTA to people to check out for Kara Core and how it can help?
Yeah, please do visit us on Kara website, which is kara.ai. We have documented our approach towards how we are adopting AI and how we are helping our customers in accelerating their business outcomes by a full adoption of AI through the entire software development lifecycle. We also have a dedicated page for Kara Code where you can see how that platform brings value to our customers. Again, Kara Code is not a product that we are offering to our customers. What we are offering is a value proposition in terms of helping them achieve their business outcomes faster. But yeah, it's always very nice talking to you, Gautam. Thanks for
Thank you
having me.
so much, Atul. Thanks for being here. Have a good one.
Cheers. Bye.